Hey guys, I'm Sun and you're watching Behind the Scenes. If you're new to this channel, Behind the Scenes is where I talk about the process of creating the Privacy Guide series, and I share tips on how to create content, how I experienced developing this channel and stuff like that. If you're not into this and you've subscribed for the Privacy Guides, you can just go about skipping this episode. All of the Behind the Scenes episodes are clearly labeled with a little pink thing around them. Okay, so today's behind the scene is about how last week went from being the worst week for this channel to being by far its best, and how people on Reddit shared so much love. So I'll be talking about that shortly. The other thing I want to talk about is a lot of people on Reddit said I should syndicate my content to PeerTube, and that's something that I'm actively researching right now. So I want to share this research with you guys, and if you have feedback, I'll have explicit questions that I'll share in a moment. Please share your feedback in the comments. I want to hear you guys on this. PeerTube is completely new to me, so yeah. So without further ado, last week was really hard for me as a content creator. When you share content on YouTube and you're really passionate about that content, when people engage with it, they like it, they share it, they comment it, they subscribe to it, that is fuel. As I mentioned to you guys a few times, some of you said, hey Sun, thanks for creating these episodes. And I was like, well, thanks for engaging with it. Thanks for caring about privacy. If this conversation was not established between us, I would be depressed. I wouldn't have the courage to create this content. It's a lot of work. So last week was really hard for me because the channel had been growing at some kind of like an accelerated pace. So each week, more of you were subscribing, more of you were engaging with the content, and the subscriber count was growing. The reason why I'm doing the Privacy Guide series is I want to get as much people as possible to care about privacy, to understand how to evaluate technology from a privacy perspective, how to think about, things when you go about installing a Chrome extension or a browser extension, how you perhaps should switch to Firefox, all of this kind of stuff. And if I go about creating this content and nobody is listening, well, it doesn't really, it's not engaging to me. So last week, it went from growing not exponentially, but at an accelerated pace, to coming to almost a standstill. So I was having like 20 to 30 new subscribers a day, and then I wake up a morning and there's no subscribers. None. By the end of the day, I think it had grown to like maybe 5 subscribers or something like this. And I got really worried. Two things came to mind. I know a lot of people don't give a fuck about privacy, and that's pretty sad. So I was like, well, maybe I've reached like the epitome of having subscribers to a privacy channel. And then I was like, well, shit, the hated one, he has a fair amount of people who appear to care. And then I recalled the hated one mentioning that his channel, the reach of his channel had significantly decreased overnight. And that got me thinking. I was like, shit, is Google trying to demote content about privacy? Obviously, we're challenging a lot of the Google value proposition here. So yeah, and so I went about, I was really a little depressed, to be honest. And I posted something on Reddit. So this is it. I said, is it me or YouTube attempts to kill privacy-related channels by degrading their growth to a standstill? So when I posted this, I wanted people to perhaps share their experience, creating content, pushing privacy and stuff like this. And it really took off. And it actually was trending number 1 on Reddit for part of the day. And that was super humbling. A lot of people shared their experience creating YouTube channels, shared how their growth compares to what I described here. A lot of people were kind of pissed that this kind of content could be censored. Anyways, short story is the amount of love that came out of that post is honestly it's humbling. It's I don't know the word in English, but it's heartwarming. Warming, is that even a word? Yeah. And a lot of people, including one of the moderators, the one that actually approved that post, said, Sun, perhaps you should try sharing this content on PeerTube. And if you share it on PeerTube, we might, and I have to reach out to the other moderators, allow it automatically, because you're not supposed to post links to videos apparently on this subreddit. Is that what they're called? I'm kind of new to Reddit. Sorry about that. So that got me really interested, and I started researching what the hell is PeerTube. Now, I might create a whole episode on this content, but essentially the internet, when it was thought out at the beginning, was an incredible decentralized network. The core concept of the internet was to connect a whole bunch of networks that are fully sovereign. So at the beginning, it was like universities who had their networks, and then universities started connecting with each other, and then the HTTP and the POP and SMTP protocols came out, so people could start sending emails, they could start viewing websites, and those websites were not hosted at hosting providers like GoDaddy or something. They were hosted on servers, Linux servers running on the campuses of those universities, and that was, I have shivers just talking about it. That was groundbreaking. That was democracy at its strongest. Anyone could start creating content and sharing it on the internet. And oh man, I have shivers all over the place. So what happened next is kind of sad. What happened next is, people started creating huge nodes on the internet. For instance, Google started wanting to own search, and then some hosting providers, such as AWS, started eating up huge chunks of the infrastructure space that hosts everything that we do on the internet. And then YouTube started, this is not like linear, but then YouTube started having this amazing platform for content creators. And Google bought it for, 1.67 billion or something like this. And Google added its search engine and started adding its, advertising platform to it. And, there's what we call the network effect. When people start using one technology, if everybody is starting to use Facebook, if everybody is starting to publish to YouTube and search on YouTube, well, huge amount of that internet traffic starts being consolidated or centralized, on those providers. And the problem with this is that helps those providers create monopoly positions. And once they have a monopoly, they essentially control what we're allowed to say, what we're not allowed to say, and they create algorithms that are designed to increase their bottom line and their growth versus promote ideas that are perhaps sound, that more people should perhaps hear. At least for me, privacy is one of the biggest concerns of our society in 2020. So essentially, we went from having a wonderful decentralized internet to having a few huge players control probably like 50%, if not more, of the internet. And it even gets scarier when Facebook, or Microsoft or Google start running their own fiber lines through our oceans. They start connecting nations. They start owning part of the infrastructure. And that really scares the shit out of me right now. So all of that to say that PeerTube is trying to fight back. PeerTube is a decentralized, federated, peer-to-peer content sharing machine. And to be honest, I am very horny about that. PeerTube is not the same as YouTube. The way its infrastructure works goes as follows. Anyone can use the open source PeerTube code to spawn a new PeerTube instance. PeerTube instances are essentially hard drive space and bandwidth, wrapped with a nice piece of technology that is PeerTube that also allows what we call peer-to-peer connections. So what that means is when you upload a video to a PeerTube instance, that video is stored on that instance. That video can then be viewed through that instance's URL. As people start watching it, if something goes viral, instead of pumping a huge amount of bandwidth out of that instance, each person watching starts being a node. And all of these people are then starting to share that content amongst each other, making so that that node is not being flooded by requests and that the bandwidth bill is not exploding, as you guys perhaps have at home with, home ISPs, home internet service providers, well, most people now have unlimited. At least that's the case here at my place. What that means is if people start sharing the content amongst each other, well, we don't have a limit as much as to how much bandwidth can be consumed by this kind of content. When you rent server space, you pay for the bandwidth. So it can become very expensive. Each video that I upload to YouTube, say it's a 10-minute video, I think it's fair to say that 10 minutes will consume 1 gigabyte of bandwidth if it's seen in HD. That amount of bandwidth is not cheap. That's why Google is such a monopoly player. They allow anyone to upload any amounts of stuff to their platform, may it be a cat video or something that is, perhaps, how can I say it, more substantial, or at least, I don't want to say that cat videos are wrong. I just mean, so PeerTube has a really interesting value proposition. PeerTube allows anyone to create an instance, and that instance can host, X amount of videos. It doesn't have to host the whole content of YouTube or the whole content of PeerTube. It can host a niche amount of content that people can then subscribe to using an open source subscription protocol. So that is super cool. And since PeerTube uses peer-to-peer to actually, share the bandwidth load amongst users, and most people have, unlimited internet at home, that means that, it's possible for people that don't have the resources of YouTube to actually start broadcasting content like this. And to be honest, that's really, really amazing. Now, to bring that even further, PeerTube supports something called federation. So what federation means is each instance can start, syndicating or, importing and rebroadcasting the content of another instance. So that means that the burden of broadcasting the content can actually be shared amongst instances. So I have a few questions for you guys. Should I, upload my content to an existing instance? By the way, if you know about instances that promote privacy content, please drop them in the comments. Or perhaps I should set up my own instance. So I don't know how much bandwidth is expected to be pumped out of that instance. So if any of you have experience, self-hosting PeerTube, please let me know in the comments and we could, share a few ideas. But the thing is, and I don't want to talk about that for a long time because this channel is not for that, but I'm also the founder and the CEO of LickStats. LickStats is kind of like a Bitly, but that is super privacy focused. And the technology that I have is designed in a redundant way, so it needs a whole bunch of servers. I have servers in New York and servers in Frankfurt. And short story is, all of those servers have a bandwidth allocation of 1 terabyte per month. And I have a whole bunch of those. So I currently have about 10 to 15 terabytes per month of unused bandwidth that's already paid for. So I'm considering using that bandwidth through LickStats and donating it to the Privacy Guide so that I can then broadcast my own content on a node that I would host. And I could even perhaps, depending on the bandwidth requirements, welcome a few other privacy content creators. So what are the pros and cons for you guys? What would you prefer? Is it totally cool that I host my own? I mean, when we think about decentralizing the internet, if everyone could host their own content, it feels like that's absolute decentralization. So maybe that's the epitome of decentralizing the internet. Or perhaps you guys feel more comfortable if it's hosted on, someone else's node or instance. Well, let me know in the comments. So I would like to end this behind the scene episode by saying thanks. Thanks to the moderator who allowed me to post this. You made a huge difference for the Privacy Guides channel. The push was super helpful. It got my morale back. And I'm super excited to create more privacy guides for you guys and to keep on encouraging that conversation that we're having around privacy. So thanks, and thanks to everyone who, shared their experience and shared feedback. That, post, wow, that's why I believe so much in the internet. So I'll see you soon for Privacy Guide episodes. Bye-bye.